the road twisted like a ribbon through the forest, narrowing as it climbed toward the estate. Lena sat behind the wheel, her fingers tight on the steering wheel, city shoes tapping nervously against the pedals. The GPS had long since lost signal, and the silence outside was so complete it felt like the trees themselves were holding their breath. She hadn't expected it to be this remote. The lawyer's letter had described the property as secluded, but this was something else. No cell service, no neighbors, just miles of pine, fog, and the looming weight of something old. When she finally turned the last bend, the house revealed itself like a secret. 3 stories of stone and timber, its windows dark and watchful. Ivy clung to the walls like veins. The air was colder here, sharper. Lena stepped out of the car and felt it immediately. An unnatural stillness, as if the estate had been waiting. She stood at the threshold, key in hand, staring at the massive oak door. It opened with a groan, revealing a grand foyer dusted in time. Chandeliers hung like frozen constellations. A staircase curved upward like a spine. Her footsteps echoed as she entered, each one swallowed by the silence. Inside, the house was beautiful in a way that felt almost tragic. Velvet drapes, faded but regal. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow her. The scent of old wood and forgotten memories lingered in the air. Lena wandered room to room, her heels clicking against marble and hardwood, her breath visible in the chill. She was a city girl, raised on subways and skyline views, not creaking floorboards and ancestral estates. Everything here felt foreign. The house was too quiet, too still. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. In the parlor, she found a photo album resting on a table, its leather cracked with age. Inside were sepia-toned images of people she didn't recognize. Men in military uniforms, women in lace dresses, children with solemn expressions. One photo caught her eye. A young woman who looked eerily like her, standing beside a massive stone wolf statue. Curious, Lena stepped outside to find it. The statue stood at the edge of the garden, half swallowed by vines. It was majestic, almost lifelike, its eyes carved with haunting precision. Something about it unsettled her. Not fear, more like recognition. She reached out to touch it, and the stone was cold, almost wet, as if it had just rained. Back inside, dusk began to settle. Shadows stretched across the walls, and the house seemed to exhale. Lena unpacked slowly, her suitcase looking absurdly modern against the antique furniture. She tried to ignore the feeling creeping up her spine, the sense that she wasn't alone. She told herself it was just nerves, just the isolation, just the weight of inheriting something she didn't ask for. But as she stood at the window, watching the fog roll in over the grounds, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching her back. And somewhere deep in the woods beyond the estate, a single wolf howl pierced the silence. She froze. It was distant, faint, probably just a wild animal. Still, she locked the doors that night, and as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ornate ceiling, Lena couldn't help but wonder what kind of legacy she had just stepped into. The house had stories. She could feel them pressing against the walls, and whether she liked it or not, she was now part of one.
The morning light filtered through gauzy curtains, casting pale gold across the floorboards. Lena woke to the sound of silence, not the hum of traffic or the distant wail of sirens, but a silence so complete it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. She wandered barefoot through the halls, the chill of the stone floor biting at her skin. The house was vast, and every room seemed to whisper of lives once lived. Dust motes danced in the air like memories, and the scent of aged paper and lavender lingered in the corners. In the drawing room, she found a cabinet filled with old photographs. Black and white portraits, faded and curled at the edges. Some were labeled in elegant cursive: Elias, 1892, Ilera, Summer Solstice, The Grove. Lena stared at them, drawn to the eyes in the photos, solemn, knowing, almost familiar. She moved deeper into the house, drawn by a strange pull. In the west wing, behind a velvet curtain, she discovered a room unlike the others. It was darker, colder. The wallpaper was peeling, and the air smelled faintly of pine and wet earth. At the center stood a statue, a massive wolf, carved from obsidian stone, its eyes gleaming with eerie precision. It wasn't just a statue, it felt like a sentinel. Lena approached it slowly, her fingers brushing the surface. The stone was cold, unnaturally so. She felt a jolt, not pain, but recognition. Something deep inside her stirred, a flicker of memory she couldn't place. She stepped back, heart racing, and noticed a plaque at the base. The inscription was worn, but she could make out a few words: Protector of the Grove, bound by love, bound by loss. That night, she lit a fire in the hearth and curled up with a blanket, trying to shake the unease. But the house didn't let her forget. As the flames flickered, she heard it again, a low, mournful howl, distant but unmistakable. It echoed through the walls, through her bones. She stood, heart pounding, and walked to the window. The grounds were cloaked in mist, the trees swaying gently. No sign of movement, no sign of life. And yet, she felt watched. She told herself it was just the isolation, just the strangeness of the place. But deep down, she knew better. The house was alive in its own way. It had stories buried in its walls, secrets etched into its stone. And Lena, whether she liked it or not, was beginning to uncover them. She didn't sleep well that night. The dreams were vague, fragmented: a forest, a pair of golden eyes, and a voice she couldn't quite hear. The estate had begun to speak, and Lena had started to listen.
The third night in the estate was colder than the rest. Lena wrapped herself in a thick sweater and wandered the halls, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the isolation anymore. It was the way the air shifted when she moved, the way the shadows seemed to lean in just a little too close. She paused in the hallway near the west wing. A sudden chill swept over her, sharp and unnatural. It wasn't the drafty old house. This was something else. The temperature dropped so quickly, her breath fogged in front of her. She rubbed her arms, trying to warm herself, but the cold clung to her skin like frost. Then came the scent: pine, damp earth, the unmistakable aroma of a forest after rain. It was strong, vivid, and completely out of place in the dry, dusty corridor. She turned in a slow circle, searching for its source, but there was nothing. No open windows, no trace of moisture, just the lingering scent and the creeping sense that she was being watched. She shook her head, muttering to herself, "Get a grip, Lena." But the house didn't let her forget. As she passed the grand staircase, she heard it, faint whispers, like wind through leaves. She froze, straining to listen. The sound was soft, almost melodic, but impossible to place. It wasn't coming from outside, it was inside, in the walls, in the air. She backed away slowly, heart pounding, and returned to the parlor. The fire she'd lit earlier had burned low, casting long, flickering shadows across the room. She sat down, trying to calm herself, telling herself it was just her imagination, just the stress of the move, just the weight of the house pressing in. Then the howl. Low, mournful, it rose from the grounds like a lament, echoing through the stone walls. Lena sat bolt upright, her skin prickling. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't distant. It was close, too close. She rushed to the window, peering out into the fog-drenched garden. Nothing moved, no sign of life, but the sound lingered, curling around the house like smoke. She didn't sleep that night. When she finally drifted off, it was into a dream unlike any she had ever known. She stood in the forest, moonlight dripping through the trees. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, powerful, cloaked in mystery. His eyes glowed gold, piercing through the dark. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply watched her. And Lena felt no fear, only familiarity, only protection. She woke with his gaze still burning in her mind, her heart racing with something she couldn't name. The house was waking up, and so was she.
Sleep came slowly that night. Lena lay beneath heavy blankets, the silence pressing in like a weight. The fire had long since died, and the house had returned to its natural state, quiet, watchful, alive in a way she couldn't explain. She closed her eyes, trying to will herself into rest, but the moment she drifted off, the dream took her. She stood in the forest again, barefoot on damp earth, moonlight spilling through the canopy like silver rain. The trees whispered around her, their branches swaying without wind. The air was thick with pine and memory. Then he appeared. A figure at the edge of the clearing, tall, broad-shouldered, cloaked in shadow and moonlight. His eyes caught hers, golden, luminous, burning with something ancient and tender. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Lena felt the words in her chest, like a song she'd always known. He stepped closer, and the forest seemed to hush. The ground beneath her feet pulsed with life. She should have been afraid. She should have run. But instead she stood still, heart open, breath steady. There was something in his gaze, protection, sorrow, longing, as if he'd waited lifetimes for her, as if he knew her, and somehow she knew him. She reached out, but her hand passed through air. He was there, but not. Real, but unreachable. Still, the connection between them was undeniable. It wrapped around her like warmth, like memory, like love. The dream shifted. She saw flashes, herself in another time, another body, a woman with dark curls and a fierce smile, a grove bathed in sunlight, laughter, a kiss beneath the stars, a battle, a farewell. Then silence. She woke with tears on her cheeks and the name Elias on her lips. The room was dark, but she felt him, not in the way dreams linger, but in the way presence fills a space. The air was charged, the shadow seemed softer, the cold had lifted. She sat up, heart racing, and looked toward the window. The wolf statue outside gleamed faintly in the moonlight, its eyes catching the glow like they were watching her. She whispered into the quiet, "Who are you?" No answer came, but the silence felt less empty. She didn't sleep again that night. Instead, she sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, replaying the dream over and over, the golden eyes, the forest, the feeling of being known. Something had awakened, not just in the house, in her. And though she couldn't explain it, Lena knew the dream wasn't just a dream. It was a memory, or a promise, and the man with the golden eyes was waiting.
The estate's pantry was nearly empty, and Lena, reluctantly, decided to venture into the nearby village. She hadn't seen another soul since arriving, and the idea of human contact, however brief, felt like a lifeline. The drive was short but winding, the forest pressing close on either side. The village emerged like a secret tucked between hills, cobbled streets, stone cottages, and a single market square where time seemed to move slower. She parked near a weathered general store and stepped out, the sound of her boots on gravel drawing curious glances. The locals watched her with guarded eyes, their conversations halting as she passed. It wasn't hostility, not exactly, more like suspicion, recognition maybe, as if they knew something she didn't. Inside the store, the air smelled of herbs and old wood. Lena gathered supplies, bread, tea, and candles, and approached the counter. The shopkeeper, a wiry woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, rang up the items in silence. Only when Lena mentioned the estate did the woman pause. "You're staying up there?" she asked, voice low. I nodded. "Inherited it. Just arrived a few days ago." The woman's gaze darkened. "That place, it's not meant for the living." Before Lena could respond, another voice cut in. Rough, amused. "Don't mind her. She's been saying that since the last moon turned red." An older man stepped forward, leaning on a cane. His eyes were kind, though tired. "Name's Silas. My family's been here longer than the trees. You're Lena, aren't you?" She blinked. "How did you—" "Word travels fast in small places, especially when the estate wakes up." Silas offered to walk her to her car, and she accepted, grateful for the company. As they strolled, he spoke softly, as if the wind might overhear. "They say a spirit guards that land, a wolf. Not just any ghost, mind you. Elias, a protector, a warrior, a tragedy." She listened, intrigued despite herself. "A century ago," Silas continued, "the village faced something dark, a force that fed on fear. Elias was one of the few who stood against it, a man with the soul of a wolf. He fought. He died, but he didn't leave." She frowned. "Why would he stay?" "Love," Silas said simply. "He had a mate, Elira. Some say she died with him, others say she escaped, but Elias's spirit never moved on. He watches, waits." She felt a chill, not fear, but something deeper, recognition. Silas stopped at her car. "Be careful. That house remembers, and it doesn't forget easily." She drove back in silence, the groceries untouched beside her. The village had given her more than supplies. It had given her a name, a legend, a warning. And as the estate came into view, looming through the mist, Lena felt the story pressing against her skin. Elias. The name echoed in her mind like a heartbeat.
The next day, Lena returned to the village, not for supplies, but for answers. The whispers, the cold spots, the howl, they weren't just coincidences. Something was stirring at the estate, and she needed to understand what. She found Silas sitting outside the apothecary, carving a piece of wood with slow, deliberate strokes. He looked up as she approached, his eyes crinkling with quiet recognition. "You felt it, haven't you?" he said, before she could speak. Lena nodded. "The house, it's not just old, it's alive." Silas gestured to the bench beside him. "Then it's time you heard the story." He spoke like a man reciting a sacred text, voice low and reverent. A century ago, this land was different, wilder, darker. Something evil came from the north. No one knows what it was, only that it fed on fear and silence. People vanished, crops withered, the forest grew restless. Lena leaned in, drawn to every word. "There was a man," Silas continued, "Elias.
Noble, fierce, not quite human, a wolf shifter, born of moonlight and blood. He lived at the estate, guarding the grove. The villagers feared him, but when the darkness came, he was the only one who stood against it. He paused, eyes distant. He fought for us, protected us, but the battle cost him everything. His life, his love. Her name was Alara. Some say she died with him, others say she escaped, her soul scattered like ash in the wind. Lena felt a chill. And Elias? His body was buried in the grove, but his spirit, it never left. Bound by love, bound by loss. They say he watches still, waiting for Alara's return, waiting for peace. He looked at her, eyes sharp now. You've seen him, haven't you? She hesitated. In dreams, golden eyes, the forest. He doesn't speak, but I feel him. Silas nodded slowly. Then the house has chosen you. It doesn't wake for just anyone. Lena's breath caught. Why me? Maybe you're part of the story. Maybe you're the ending it's been waiting for. He handed her the carved wolf figurine. Take this. It's a symbol of protection, of remembrance. You'll need it. She left the village with more than she came for. The legend of Elias echoed in her mind, weaving itself into her thoughts like a thread she couldn't untangle. Back at the estate, the air felt different, charged, expectant. She stood before the wolf statue in the garden, the figurine clutched in her hand. The wind stirred the trees, and for a moment she thought she heard her name whispered in the leaves. Lena. The house was no longer just a place. It was a story, and she was inside it.
The storm rolled in just after dusk, thunder rumbling low across the hills. Lena lit candles throughout the estate, their flickering glow casting long shadows on the walls. The house felt restless, like something beneath its skin was stirring. She wandered into the library, drawn by instinct more than intention. The room was vast, lined with shelves that reached the ceiling, filled with books whose spines had long since faded. She ran her fingers along the titles, pausing at a section tucked behind a tapestry. A draft whispered through the fabric. Curious, Lena pulled the tapestry aside and found a narrow door, nearly invisible against the wall. It creaked open to reveal a hidden study, dusty, untouched, cloaked in silence. A desk sat at the center, papers scattered like forgotten thoughts. On the far wall, a chest rested beneath a portrait of a man with golden eyes. Her breath caught. She knelt before the chest. It was locked, but the key she'd found in the parlor days ago fit perfectly. Inside, wrapped in velvet, was a leather-bound journal. The cover bore a single name, etched in elegant script. Elias. She opened it slowly. The pages were filled with his voice, strong, poetic, aching. He wrote of the forest, of the village, of battles fought in moonlight. But most of all, he wrote of Alara, his love, his mate, his reason. He read for hours, the storm outside forgotten. Elias's words painted vivid scenes, a grove where they danced beneath the stars, a promise made in blood and breath, a final stand against a darkness that threatened everything. He had known he would die, but he had hoped she would live. One passage stopped her cold. If she returns, even in another form, I will know her. Her soul sings to mine. Time cannot silence it. Lena's hands trembled. She felt something shift inside her, like a door opening. Memories she didn't recognize flickered at the edges of her mind. A laugh, a kiss, a name whispered in the dark. She closed the journal, heart pounding, and looked up at the portrait. Elias's eyes seemed to meet hers, full of longing and recognition. That night, her dream was different. Elias stood closer than before, his form clearer, his presence stronger. He spoke her name, softly, reverently. Lena. She reached for him, and though her hand met only air, she felt warmth, connection, a pull so deep it defied logic. She woke with tears on her cheeks and the journal clutched to her chest. The house was no longer just haunted, it was remembering, and so was she.
The journal lay open beside her bed, its pages fluttering in the breeze from the cracked window. Lena couldn't stop reading. Elias's words had a rhythm, a pulse, like a heartbeat echoing through time. Each entry pulled her deeper into his world, his love for Ilara, his sorrow, his sacrifice. That night, sleep came quickly, and with it, the dream. She stood in the grove Elias had described, a sacred place, bathed in moonlight, the trees swaying gently as if whispering secrets. The air shimmered, thick with memory. Lena felt herself drawn forward, her feet moving without thought. Elias was waiting. He stood beneath the ancient tree, his form clearer than ever. No longer just shadow and suggestion. He was luminous, ethereal, a man made of light and longing. His golden eyes met hers, and the world seemed to still. "Lena," he said, voice low and aching. She stepped closer, heart pounding. His presence wrapped around her like warmth, like safety. She felt no fear, only recognition, only the pull of something older than time. He reached out, and though their hands couldn't touch, the space between them pulsed with energy. Lena felt it in her bones, in her soul, a connection that defied logic, a bond that had never truly broken. Images flashed before her eyes, fragments of another life, a woman with fierce eyes and a wild laugh, a kiss beneath stars, a battle fought side by side, a promise whispered in the dark. She gasped, overwhelmed. The memories weren't hers, and yet they were. Elias stepped closer. "You are her," he whispered. "You have returned." Lena's breath caught. The truth settled over her like a cloak. She wasn't just drawn to the estate, she was part of it, part of him, Ilara reborn, a soul returned. She woke with tears streaming down her face, the dream still vivid in her mind. The journal lay open to a page she hadn't read before. "If she finds me again, I will not let go. Not even death will keep me from her." Lena pressed her hand to the page, heart aching with something she couldn't name. Love, loss, destiny. She rose and walked through the halls, speaking softly into the silence. "Elias, I'm here." The house responded. The air shifted. The shadows stirred. A faint glow flickered in the corner of her vision. She turned, but nothing was there. Still, she felt him. She stood before the wolf statue in the garden, moonlight bathing its surface. "Come back," she whispered. "I am not afraid." The wind stirred the trees, and a howl rose from the forest, low, mournful, familiar. Lena closed her eyes. She was no longer just a visitor. She was the key. And Elias was waiting.
The days grew quieter, but the silence was no longer empty. It was charged, alive with something Lena could feel but not yet name. The estate had begun to change, or perhaps it was revealing itself. She noticed it first in the trees. From the library window, she saw a shimmer move through the forest, a shape, fluid in silver, like moonlight caught in motion. It darted between trunks, too fast to follow, too graceful to be a trick of the eye. She blinked and it was gone. Then came the howls. no longer distant or muffled. They rang clear through the night, mournful and melodic, as if calling to her. Lena would wake with the sound still echoing in her chest, her heart aching with a longing she couldn't explain. Objects began to shift. Books she hadn't touched were found open to pages about soul bonds and reincarnation. Candles she hadn't lit flickered softly in the corners of rooms. Her coat left on a chair appeared folded neatly on her bed. It wasn't frightening, it was gentle, intentional, like someone was watching over her. She spoke out loud sometimes, testing the air. "Elias, is that you?" The house would respond in subtle ways. A breeze through a closed room, a faint scent of pine and earth, the soft creak of floorboards when no one was walking. She began to feel him everywhere, in the warmth of the sun through the windows, in the hush of the grove, in the way her heartbeat quickened when she stepped into the West Wing. One evening, she stood in the garden, the wolf statue casting a long shadow in the fading light. The air shimmered again, and this time she didn't look away. A form emerged, not fully solid, not fully spirit. A wolf-like silhouette, luminous and shifting, moved through the trees. It paused at the edge of the clearing, watching her. Lena didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply opened her heart. The figure bowed its head, then vanished into the mist. She returned to the house breathless, her soul humming with recognition. That night, she wrote in her journal, not Elias's, but her own. She wrote of the visions, the whispers, the feeling of being known. She wrote of the way her emotions seemed to ripple through the estate. When she was calm, the house was still. When she was anxious, the shadows stirred. She was the anchor. She was the reason Elias's spirit was growing stronger, and deep down, she knew. This wasn't just haunting. It was reunion. The veil between worlds was thinning, and love was the thread pulling him through.
The estate had grown quieter, but not in the way it once was. It was no longer a silence of abandonment. It was a silence of listening. Lena could feel it. The house responded to her now, not just in whispers or flickers of light, but in mood, in rhythm. She noticed it first when she laughed. A rare moment, sparked by a memory of her childhood, had made her chuckle aloud in the kitchen. The fire in the hearth flared brighter, the air warmed, the shadows retreated. It was subtle but unmistakable. Then, the opposite. A wave of anxiety hit her one morning, an old fear creeping in from nowhere. The hallway grew cold, the windows fogged. The wolf statue outside seemed to darken, its eyes gleaming with something mournful. She tested it. She stood in the garden, closed her eyes, and let herself feel joy, gratitude, love. The wind stirred gently, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. A shimmer moved through the trees. Elias's form, clearer than before, watching her with quiet reverence. Later, she sat in the study, journal open, and wrote, "He feels me, not just sees me, not just hears me, he responds to my heart." It was a revelation. Elias's spirit wasn't just haunting the estate. He was tethered to her. Her emotions were the thread. When she was calm, he was present. When she was afraid, he grew restless. It was as if her soul was the anchor he'd been waiting for across lifetimes. She began to speak to him more often. Not in desperation, but in companionship. She'd walk the halls and whisper her thoughts, her hopes, her fears. And the house would answer, not in words, but in warmth, in movement, in the subtle rearrangement of objects that let her know she was heard. One evening she found a rose on her pillow, fresh, wild from the grove. She held it to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. "You're here," she whispered. "You're really here." The wind stirred the curtains, and the scent of pine filled the room. She didn't need proof anymore. She felt him in her laughter, in her sorrow, in the quiet moments between thoughts. Elias was growing stronger, and Lena was beginning to understand why. She wasn't just the heir to the estate, she was the key to its awakening, and the heart Elias had waited for across lifetimes was finally beating again.
The journal had become her lifeline. Lena read it every night, tracing Elias's words like a map through time. But lately, the entries weren't just stories. They were triggers. Each passage stirred something inside her, something buried deep. It began with flashes, a grove bathed in golden light, a hand in hers, laughter echoing through the trees, a name whispered in the wind, Elara. She dismissed them at first, dreams, imagination, but they grew stronger, more vivid. She'd be walking through the estate and suddenly feel déjà vu so intense it made her dizzy. She knew which floorboards creaked before stepping on them. She knew the scent of the wild roses in the garden before she'd ever smelled them. One afternoon, she stood in the study, staring at Elias's portrait. Her heart ached, not with confusion, but with longing. She touched the frame, and a memory surged forward, her hand in his, a promise made beneath moonlight. She stumbled back, breathless. The memories came in waves after that, scenes of another life, another body. She was Elara, fierce, loyal, in love with a man who was more than human. She saw them together, fighting side by side against a darkness that threatened everything. She saw their final night, the grove lit by fire, Elias wounded, her scream lost in the chaos. She collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face. It was real. She wasn't just Lena, she was Elara reborn. The realization settled over her like a storm. Her soul had returned to the estate, drawn by love, by unfinished promises. Elias hadn't stayed behind for just anyone. He had stayed for her. She rose slowly, heart pounding, and walked through the halls. The house felt different now, less haunted, more sacred. She spoke aloud, voice trembling. I remember. The wind stirred. She stood before the wolf statue, moonlight casting silver across its surface. She whispered, I'm here. I came back. The air shimmered. A figure appeared at the edge of the garden. Elias, luminous and still. His golden eyes met hers, and this time she didn't look away. I know who I am, and I know who you are. He stepped closer, his form flickering with emotion. Though they couldn't touch, the space between them pulsed with connection. She reached out, and though her fingers met only air, she felt warmth, memory, love. The past had returned, and Lena was no longer just a visitor in this story. She was its heart, its beginning, and its long-awaited continuation.
The house no longer felt haunted. It felt inhabited, not by something dark or malevolent, but by a presence that had waited patiently for her to remember. Lena walked its halls with purpose now, no longer flinching at whispers or shadows. She knew who she was. She knew who he was. And she was ready. She stood in the study, Elias's journal open before her. The final entries were different, less about battles and loss, more about longing, about hope, about the possibility of reunion. She traced the ink with her fingers, her heart steady. Quote, If she calls to me, I will come. If she remembers, I will return. End quote. She closed the book and rose. The house was quiet, expectant. She walked through each room, lighting candles, opening windows, letting the night air flow through. It was time. She stood in the grand foyer, the moonlight spilling through the stained glass above. Her voice was soft but clear. "Elias," she said, "I remember. I know who I am. I know who you are. And I'm not afraid." The wind stirred. She stepped into the garden, the wolf statue gleaming in the moonlight. The grove beyond beckoned, its trees swaying gently. She walked slowly, deliberately, her bare feet brushing against the earth. At the center of the grove she stopped. "I invite you," she said, "not as a stranger, not as a ghost, but as the one you loved. Come home." The air shimmered. A figure began to form, light and shadow weaving together, shaping into the man she'd seen in dreams. Elias. His golden eyes met hers, and this time he didn't vanish. He stood before her, ethereal but whole, his presence pulsing with emotion. "You called," he said, voice like wind through leaves. "I did," she whispered. They stood in silence, the space between them charged with memory and longing. Though he couldn't touch her, Lena felt him, his sorrow, his joy, his love. It wrapped around her like warmth, like a forgotten melody. "I've waited," he said. "And I came back," she replied. The grove glowed faintly, the trees bending as if bowing to their reunion. The estate, once a place of mourning, now felt like a sanctuary. Elias stepped closer. "You are Ilara." She said, "I am Lena, but Ilara lives in me, and I choose you, now, in this life." He bowed his head, light flickering across his form. "Then I will stay, as long as you let me." She smiled, tears glistening. "Forever, if I can." The wind carried their words through the forest, through the house, through the veil between worlds. And for the first time in a century, Elias was no longer just a memory. He was home.
The days passed in quiet wonder. Lena no longer questioned the presence in the house. She welcomed it. She spoke to Elias openly now, her voice echoing through the halls like a song long forgotten. And he responded, not just in whispers or flickers of light, but in form. It began in the grove. She stood beneath the ancient tree, the moon casting silver across the clearing. The air shimmered, and Elias appeared, not as a shadow, not as a wolf, but as a man made of light and shadow. His features were clear now, strong jaw, golden eyes, a presence that pulsed with warmth and sorrow. He stood before her, ethereal but real. "I can see you," she whispered. "And I can see you," he replied, voice like wind through leaves. They couldn't touch, not yet. His form flickered when she reached out, like mist parting around her fingers. But they could speak. They could share thoughts, memories, emotions. Lena felt him in her heart, in her soul, in the quiet spaces between words. They spent hours together. In the garden, Elias told her stories of the forest, how it had changed, how it remembered. In the library, Lena read him passages from books he'd never lived to see. They laughed, they mourned, they rediscovered each other. Their bond deepened. It wasn't just memory or magic. It was love, real, present, undeniable. Lena felt it in the way her chest ached when he vanished at dawn. Elias felt it in the way the house warmed when she smiled. They were two halves of a story that refused to end. But the bond was forbidden. They both knew it. The veil between worlds was thinning. Elias's presence, once gentle, now stirred the air with power. The estate pulsed with energy, the forest grew restless, and Lena began to sense other things, shadows that didn't belong to Elias, whispers that carried no warmth. Still, she didn't turn away. She stood in the grove one night, the wind howling through the trees, and spoke with conviction. I don't care what the rules are, you're here, I'm here. That's enough. Elias's form flickered, his eyes glowing with emotion. It may not be. She stepped closer. Then let it be. The wind stilled. The grove held its breath, and for a moment the world felt suspended, caught between love and consequence. They couldn't touch, but they were together. And that, for now, was everything. The estate had never felt more alive. Lena and Elias spent their days in quiet joy, their bond deepening with every shared moment. Though he remained untouchable, Elias's presence was constant. His voice, his gaze, the way the house warmed when he was near. But the veil was thinning. It began subtly. A mirror cracked without cause, a door slammed in a room with no wind. Lena dismissed them at first. Old house quirks, nothing more. But the occurrences grew stranger. The air grew heavy. The shadows grew bold. One morning, she found the rose Elias had left her, wilted, blackened at the edges. The scent of pine was replaced by something sour, metallic. The house groaned, its walls seeming to shift, and in the corners of her vision, Lena saw movement, figures that vanished when she turned. Elias grew quiet. He appeared less often, his form flickering with strain. "They're waking," he said one night, his voice taut. The others, spirits that were bound by silence. The veil kept them dormant. Our bond, it's unraveling that silence. Lena's heart clenched. Why now? Because love is powerful, and power stirs everything, not just the good. The forest changed. Fog rolled in at odd hours, thick and unnatural. The trees whispered louder, their branches twitching like fingers. Lena heard voices in the wind, not Elias's, but others. Cold, hungry, lost. The village felt it too. Silas came to the estate, his face pale. "Something's wrong," he said. "The fog won't lift. Children are hearing whispers. Objects move on their own. The elders say the veil is breaking." She tried to reassure him, but doubt gnawed at her. She had invited Elias back. She had opened the door, and now others were slipping through. She stood in the grove that night, calling to Elias. He appeared slowly, his form dimmer than before. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to cause this." He shook his head. "You didn't. We did, together." They stood in silence, the forest pulsing around them. Lena felt the weight of their love. Beautiful, yes, but dangerous. It had defied death. It had rewritten fate. And now the world was responding. "I won't let them take you," she whispered. Elias's eyes glowed. "Then we must be ready." The estate, once a sanctuary, was now a battleground between memory and consequence. The bond that had brought Elias back was strong, but it had awakened more than love. It had awakened the forgotten.
The fog came first. Thick, unnatural, rolling in from the forest like a living thing. It clung to the village streets, muffling sound, distorting light. Children woke crying, claiming they heard voices in the mist. Dogs refused to go outside. The elders whispered of old warnings, of balance, of boundaries, of spirits that should never linger. Lena heard the rumors from Silas. He arrived at the estate, his face drawn, his voice tight. "They're afraid," he said. "The villagers say the veil is broken, that something dark is leaking through."
She tried to explain. "It's Elias. He's not dangerous. He's love." Silas looked at her, sorrow in his eyes. Love doesn't always come without cost. The estate pulsed with energy. Lena felt it in her bones. The air was charged, heavy with emotion. Elias appeared more often now, his form stronger, his voice clearer. But with each visit the house grew louder. Creaks, whispers, flickers of movement in the corners. And it wasn't just Elias anymore. Lena began to sense others, spirits that didn't carry warmth, shadows that lingered too long, whispers that chilled her spine. The estate, once a sanctuary, had become a beacon. Her bond with Elias had opened a door, and not everything that stepped through came with good intentions. In the village, objects moved on their own. Fires sputtered without wind. People spoke of dreams filled with eyes watching from the trees. The mayor called for a gathering, demanding answers. Some blamed Lena, others spoke of curses. A few whispered of Ilara, of the legend reborn. Lena stood in the grove that night, Elias beside her, the moon casting silver across her form. "They're afraid," she said. "This should be, not of me, but what follows." She turned to him. "Can we stop it?" Elias's gaze was heavy. "We can try, but the veil is thin now, and the balance is shifting." They stood in silence, the forest pulsing around them. Lena felt the weight of their love. Beautiful, yes, but powerful. Too powerful. It had defied death. It had rewritten fate. And now the world was responding. She walked through the village the next day, eyes following her, whispers trailing behind her. She felt like a ghost herself, half in one world, half in another. But she didn't hide. She didn't apologize. She was part of the story now. And the stories, once awakened, demand their reckoning. The fog thickened. The whispers grew louder. And somewhere deep in the forest, something stirred. Not Elias. Something else. Something that had waited for the veil to break. And now it was coming.
The fog thickened into permanence. It no longer rolled in. It stayed, blanketing the estate and the village in a hush that felt like held breath. Lena felt it in her bones. Something was coming. Not a spirit. Not a whisper. Something older. Something watching. It arrived without warning. At dusk, the grove darkened unnaturally. The trees bent inward, their branches forming a circle. Symbols glowed faintly on the ground, ancient, pulsing with power. Lena stood at the edge, heart pounding, Elias beside her, his form flickering with tension. Then they appeared. 7 figures stepped from the mist, cloaked in robes that shimmered like starlight. Their eyes glowed with knowledge, their presence heavy with authority. They didn't walk, they glided, untouched by earth or time. At their center stood a woman with silver hair and eyes like obsidian. She spoke with a voice that echoed across dimensions. "We are the Council of the Veil." Lena bowed instinctively, though no one had told her to. Elias stood tall, his gaze steady, but Lena could feel his energy shift. He knew them. He feared them. The woman's voice cut through the air. "You have disturbed the balance. A soul has returned. A bond has been forged. The veil has spinned." Lena stepped forward. "He's not a threat. He's love. He's memory." The council didn't blink. He is death, and death must remain beyond. Elias spoke then, his voice calm but firm. I did not return to haunt. I returned because she called, because our bond is older than your laws. The council murmured among themselves, their voices like wind through stone. The silver-haired leader raised a hand. The veil is sacred. It protects the living from the chaos of the beyond. Your presence here has awakened more than love. It has stirred the forgotten. Lena's heart raced. Then help us. Don't punish us for something beautiful. The leader's gaze softened, but only slightly. Beauty does not excuse imbalance. We are not here to destroy, we are here to decide. They turned inward, forming a circle. Symbols flared brighter. The air pulsed. Lena felt her soul tugged, examined, weighed. Elias's form flickered violently, as if being pulled in two directions. Then silence. The leader spoke again. There is one path, a ritual. Ancient, dangerous. It may anchor his soul to the living world, but it requires sacrifice. Lena stepped forward without hesitation. I'll do it. Elias's voice rose. No. The council turned to leave, their decision made. Prepare. The grove will open when the moon is full. Choose wisely. The cost will be great. And just like that, they vanished. Lena stood in the clearing, the symbols still glowing faintly, Elias beside her, silent. The reckoning had begun, and love would be tested.
The moon rose full and heavy over the grove, casting pale light across the ritual circle etched into the earth. Lena stood at its edge, Elias beside her, his form flickering with tension. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. The council had returned. 7 figures emerged from the mist, their robes trailing like smoke, their eyes unreadable. The silver-haired leader stepped forward, her voice cutting through the night. The veil is ruptured. The balance is broken. Elias must return. Lena's breath caught. No! The leader's gaze didn't waver. His presence here is unnatural. It has stirred the dead. The living suffer. The world trembles. Elias stepped forward, his voice steady. I did not come to harm. I came because she called, because our bond is older than your laws. The council murmured, their voices like wind through stone. The leader raised a hand. Love does not excuse imbalance. You are a soul out of place. You must return. Lena's heart pounded. You don't understand. He's not a threat. He's peace. He's protection. He's mine. The leader turned to her. You are mortal. Your heart is powerful, but it cannot rewrite the laws of existence. Lena stepped into the circle, her voice rising. Then your laws are broken, because love this strong doesn't die. It doesn't fade. It doesn't belong in silence. The grove pulsed with energy. Elias's form shimmered, growing brighter. The council shifted, uneasy. You are tethered to her. That tether is dangerous. It draws others. It weakens the veil. Lena's voice trembled, but she didn't back down. Then help us. Don't erase us. The council fell silent. Then the leader spoke again. There is one path, a ritual, ancient, rare. It may anchor his soul to the living world, but it requires sacrifice. a life force of immense power. Lena didn't hesitate. I'll do it. Elias's voice rose, sharp. No! She turned to him. I won't lose you again. The council began to fade, their verdict delivered. Prepare. The moon will guide the ritual. Choose wisely. The cost will be great. And then they were gone. Lena slid in the circle, the symbols still glowing. Elias stepped beside her, his gaze full of sorrow. You would give your life for me. She nodded. I already did once. He reached for her, his hand passing through air. I won't let you. She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. Then we find another way. The grove was silent, but the choice had been laid bare. Love had defied death. Now it would be asked to defy fate.
The grove was quiet, but the silence felt brittle, like glass waiting to shatter. Lena stood at its center, the ritual circle etched into the earth, glowing faintly beneath her feet. Elias hovered nearby, his form flickering with tension. The council had spoken. The verdict was clear. He was to return. But Lena wasn't ready to let go. She faced the empty air where the council had stood, her voice steady. You're wrong. Elias doesn't belong to the dead. He belongs here, with me. The wind stirred, and the symbols pulsed brighter, as if reacting to her defiance. Elias stepped forward, his gaze full of sorrow. Lena, they won't listen. Their laws are older than memory. She turned to him, eyes blazing. Then their laws are blind. They see you as a threat, but I see you as a promise. You didn't come back to haunt. You came back to heal. Elias's form shimmered, his energy rippling through the grove. They fear what we've awakened. I do too, Lena nodded. But fear isn't reason enough to erase love. She walked the circle's edge, her fingers brushing the glowing symbols. You protected this land once. You gave everything. And now you're being punished for returning to what you loved. The air thickened. A voice echoed from the trees. One of the councils. The veil must be restored. The balance must be kept. Lena didn't flinch. Balance isn't silence. It's harmony. And Elias is part of that harmony. He's not tearing the veil. He's reminding it what love looks like. The grove pulsed. Elias stepped closer, his voice low. If I stay, others will come. Not all of them kind. I know, Lena whispered. But I won't lose you again. Not without fighting. She knelt in the center of the circle, placing her hand on the earth. I accept the risk. I accept the cost. Because love this strong doesn't deserve to be buried. The wind howled, the trees bent inward, and the council's presence returned, silent, watching. The silver-haired leader spoke, her voice softer now. You would defy death for him? Lena rose, her voice unwavering. I already did. The council murmured, their forms flickering like candlelight. The leader stepped forward. Then we offer a choice, a ritual, a sacrifice. But know this, once begun, it cannot be undone. Lena nodded. I understand. Elias's gaze met hers, full of fear and awe. You're choosing me? I always have. The grove fell silent. The council vanished once more, and Lena stood in the circle, heart pounding, soul steady. She had refused to let go, and now the world would answer.
The grove was quiet, but the air pulsed with ancient energy. Lena stood at its center, the ritual circle etched into the earth glowing faintly beneath her feet.
Elias hovered nearby, his form flickering with tension. The council had returned. 7 figures emerged from the mist, their robes trailing like smoke, their eyes unreadable. The silver-haired leader stepped forward, her voice cutting through the night. "The veil is ruptured. The balance is broken. Elias must return." Lena's breath caught. "No!" The leader's gaze didn't waver. "His presence here is unnatural. It has stirred the dead. The living suffer. The world trembles." Elias stepped forward, his voice steady. "I did not come to harm. I came because she called, because our bond is older than your laws." The council murmured, their voices like wind through stone. The leader raised a hand. "Love does not excuse imbalance. You are a soul out of place. You must return." Lena's heart pounded. "You don't understand. He's not a threat. He's peace. He's protection. He's mine." The leader turned to her. "You are mortal. Your heart is powerful, but it cannot rewrite the laws of existence." Lena stepped into the circle, her voice rising. "Then your laws are broken, because love this strong doesn't die. It doesn't fade. It doesn't belong in silence." The grove pulsed with energy. Elias's form shimmered, growing brighter. The council shifted, uneasy. He is tethered to you. That tether is dangerous. It draws others. It weakens the veil." Lena's voice trembled, but she did not back down. "Then help us. Don't erase us." The council fell silent. Then the leader spoke again. "There is one path, a ritual, ancient, rare. It may anchor his soul to the living world, but it requires sacrifice, a life force of immense power." Lena didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." Elias's voice rose, sharp. "No!" She turned to him. "I won't lose you again." The council began to fade, their verdict delivered. "Prepare. The moon will guide the ritual. Choose wisely. The cost will be great." And then they were gone. Lena stood in the grove, the symbols still glowing. Elias stepped beside her, his gaze full of sorrow. "You would give your life for me?" She nodded. "I already did once." He reached for her, his hand passing through air. "I won't let you." She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "Then we find another way." The grove was silent, but the choice had been laid bare. Love had defied death. Now it would be asked to defy fate.
The grove was transformed. Under the full moon's gaze, the ancient trees bent inward, forming a cathedral of branches and light. Symbols carved into the earth glowed with the soft, pulsing energy, gold, silver, and deep crimson. The air was thick with magic, old and waiting. Lena stood at the center of the ritual circle, her heart steady, her soul braced. She wore a simple white dress, the hem brushing the glowing runes beneath her feet. Around her, the council formed a ring, their robes shimmering like starlight, their voices low and rhythmic. Elias stood just beyond the circle, his form flickering between shadow and light. He watched her with eyes full of sorrow and awe. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I do. This is the only way." The council began to chant. Their voices rose like wind through stone, ancient syllables vibrating through the ground. The symbols flared brighter, the trees trembled, the veil between worlds thinned, and the grove became a bridge between life and death, between memory and flesh. Lena felt the pull. Her heartbeat slowed, her breath deepened. Energy surged through her, drawn from her soul, her love, her past. She closed her eyes and saw it all. Alara's laughter, Elias's golden gaze, the battle, the promise, the centuries of waiting. She stepped forward. The center of the circle glowed white-hot, and Lena entered it without hesitation. Her body trembled, but her spirit stood firm. She raised her arms, offering herself to the ritual, to the magic, to the possibility. The council's chant grew louder. The wind howled. The earth shook. And Elias cried out, "No!" He rushed forward, his form blazing with light. The council tried to hold him back, but he broke through, his energy surging. He reached Lena, and though he couldn't touch her, his presence wrapped around her like fire. "I won't let you die for me," he said, voice cracking. "Then what do we do?" Lena asked him, tears filling her eyes. Elias looked at her, then at the circle, then at the moon. "I give myself." Before the council could stop him, Elias poured his ghostly energy into Lena, his memories, his love, his essence. The ritual flared, the symbols exploding with light. Lena screamed, not in pain, but in transformation. The grove pulsed, the veil tore, and something ancient awakened. Not destruction, not death, but rebirth. Elias's form began to fade, his light dimming, his voice growing faint. "I love you," he whispered. Lena collapsed to her knees, the energy still surging through her. The ritual had begun, and its outcome was no longer certain.
The grove was quiet now, the ritual circle still glowing from the surge of Elias's energy. Lena knelt at its center, her breath shallow, her body trembling from the force that had passed through her. The council watched from the shadows, their forms flickering like candlelight, waiting. She rose slowly. Her white dress clung to her skin, damp with sweat and moonlight. Her heart beat steadily, but her soul felt stretched, like it had already begun to unravel. Elias hovered nearby, his form dimmer than before, his gaze locked on her. "I'm ready," Lena said. The silver-haired leader stepped forward. "You understand what this means?" "I do," she replied. "I offer myself, my life force, my soul, whatever it takes." Elias surged forward, his voice raw. "No, you don't have to do this!" Lena turned to him, her eyes full of tears and certainty. "I do. You gave everything once. You protected this land. You loved me across lifetimes. Now it's my turn." The council began to chant. The symbols flared, casting golden light across the grove. The trees bent inward, their branches trembling. Lena stepped into the center, arms raised, heart open. The energy surged toward her, drawn by her offering. She felt it immediately, a pull deep within her chest. Her memories, her emotions, her very essence began to rise, drawn into the ritual. She saw flashes. Ilara's smile, Elias's golden eyes, the battle, the promise. Her soul was being woven into the magic, into the land, into Elias. The pain was sharp, but not cruel. It was sacrifice. It was love. Elias cried out, his form blazing, "Stop! Please!" The council did not falter. Lena's knees buckled, but she remained standing. Her voice was soft but clear. "I love you. I always have." The ritual reached its peak. The light exploded outward, bathing the grove in brilliance. Lena's body shimmered, her soul stretching toward Elias, toward the veil, toward the edge of existence. And then Elias intervened. He surged forward, pouring what remained of his ghostly energy into her. His memories, his love, his essence. He wrapped her in warmth, shielding her from the final pull. "No!" he whispered.
Not like this! The ritual flared again, but the energy shifted. It no longer drew from Lena. It drew from the grove itself, from the ancient roots, from the bond between them, from something older than sacrifice. Lena collapsed, breathless, her body whole. Elias's form flickered, dimming, but the ritual had not failed. It had changed, and something new had begun.
The grove trembled. The ritual had reached its apex, the symbols etched into the earth glowing with blinding intensity. Lena stood at the center, her body swaying, her soul stretched thin by the ancient magic. The council's chant echoed through the trees, a rhythm older than time itself. She was ready to give everything. Her life force surged outward, drawn into the ritual's core. Her memories, her love, her essence, offered freely, willingly. The veil between worlds pulsed, ready to accept the sacrifice. And then, Elias moved. He surged forward, his form blazing with light and shadow. The council tried to hold him back, their voices rising in protest, but Elias was no longer just a spirit. He was love incarnate. He reached Lena, and though he couldn't touch her, his energy wrapped around her like fire. "No," he said, voice cracking. "You will not die for me." Lena's eyes widened. "Elias!" He didn't let her finish. He poured himself into her, his ghostly energy, memories, strength, sorrow, devotion, flooded into her soul. The ritual flared, the symbols exploding with light. Lena screamed, not in pain, but in transformation. The grove shook, the trees bent, the veil tore. Elias's form began to fade. His golden eyes dimmed, his voice grew faint. He whispered, "I love you." Lena collapsed to her knees, her body trembling, her heart pounding. She felt him inside her, not haunting, but healing. His energy wrapped around her core, shielding her from the ritual's final pull. The council fell silent. The ritual had not failed, it had changed. Instead of consuming Lena, it had drawn from the grove itself, from the ancient roots, from the sacred soil, from the bond between them. Elias's selfless act had rewritten the magic, reshaped the outcome. But he was fading. Lena crawled to the edge of the circle, reaching for him. "Don't go," she whispered. Elias smiled, his form barely visible. "I gave you everything. That's enough." The grove pulsed once more, and then a shift. The energy didn't dissipate. It condensed, it gathered, it began to reshape. Elias's fading light was pulled downward, into the earth, into the roots, into Lena's heart. The council watched, silent, reverent. Something ancient had been awakened. Not death, not loss, but rebirth. Lena collapsed, breathless, her body whole, her soul burning with light. Elias was gone, but not lost. The ritual had succeeded, and the forest held its breath.
The grove was silent. The ritual had ended, but its echoes lingered in the air, like a song still humming beneath the surface. Lena lay in the grass, her breath shallow, her body trembling with the weight of what had passed. The symbols around her had dimmed, but the earth still pulsed, alive, waiting. Elias was gone. His ghostly form had vanished in the final surge of light. His energy poured into her, into the ritual, into the land itself. Lena felt hollow and full all at once, her soul burning with warmth and sorrow. She whispered his name into the quiet, and the grove answered. The ground beneath her hand shimmered, the roots glowed faintly. The air thickened with energy, not spectral, but living. Lena sat up, her heart pounding. Something was happening, something impossible. The council watched from the shadows, silent, reverent. The ritual had not just anchored Elias's soul, it had begun to rebuild him. From the soil, from the sacred grove, from the love that defied death, his essence was being drawn back, not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as flesh, as blood, as life. Lena crawled to the center of the circle, her eyes wide. The ground cracked gently, and light spilled upward. A form began to take shape, slowly, painfully, beautifully. First light, then shadow, then skin, then breath. Elias. He lay curled in the grass, naked, trembling, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. His hair was damped with dew, his skin flushed with warmth. Lena reached for him, and this time, her hand met his. He was solid. He was real. He was alive. Tears streamed down her face as she cradled him, whispering his name over and over. Elias opened his eyes, golden, human, filled with wonder and disbelief. "You came back," she said. "I never left," he whispered. The grove pulsed once more, then stilled. The council stepped forward, their expressions unreadable. The silver-haired leader spoke softly. "The ritual has rewritten the bond. Life has answered. The balance is restored." Lena held Elias close, her heart overflowing. "He's alive." The leader nodded. "Not by death, not by sacrifice, but by love." They vanished into the mist, leaving Lena and Elias alone beneath the moonlight. He sat up slowly, his body aching, his soul reborn. Lena kissed his forehead, her fingers tracing the lines of his face, memorizing every detail. The miracle had happened, not through power, not through defiance, but through devotion. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Elias took Lena's hand in his, warm, solid, human. Together, they walked out of the grove, into a world that had been waiting for them.
The sun rose slowly over the estate, casting golden light across the dew-soaked grass. The grove, once a place of shadows and whispers, now shimmered with warmth. The ritual was complete. The veil had closed, and Elias was alive. Lena tapped beside him beneath the ancient tree, her fingers entwined with his. His skin was warm, his breath steady, his heartbeat real. She could feel it beneath her palm, a rhythm that echoed her own. For the first time, they touched without resistance. No flicker, no fade, just flesh and blood. He looked at her, eyes still golden, but now filled with wonder. "I didn't think it was possible," he said. She smiled, tears glistening. "Neither did I, but love rewrote the rules." They stayed in the grove for hours, wrapped in silence and awe. Elias moved slowly, relearning the weight of his body, the feel of the earth beneath his feet. Lena watched him with quiet joy, every movement a miracle. Later, they returned to the estate. The house, once cold and haunted, now felt warm. The air was lighter, the shadows softer. The wolf statue in the garden gleamed in the morning light, not as a tombstone, but as a monument, a symbol of protection, of legacy, of love. Elias walked through the halls, touching the walls, the furniture, the books. Everything was familiar, yet new. Lena followed him, her heart full. They were no longer bound by dreams or memory. They were here, together. He stood before the mirror in the study, staring at his reflection. "I look like him, but I feel different." "You are," she replied. "You're not just Elias the protector, You're Elias the reborn." They spent the day rediscovering each other. Lena showed him the modern world, her phone, her music, her favorite books. Elias taught her the language of the forest, the rhythm of the land, the sacred places hidden in the trees. They laughed, they kissed, they lived. And the estate responded. The energy shifted. The walls no longer groaned, the cold spots vanished, the whispers faded. The house, once a vessel of sorrow, became a sanctuary, a place of peace, a place of beginnings. Elias stood in the garden that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Lena joined him, her head resting on his shoulder. "We're really here." "We are. And this time, we stay." The wind stirred gently, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. The grove behind them pulsed with quiet magic. The veil was sealed, the balance restored. And love, true, defiant, eternal, had found its place in the world. Together they watched the stars emerge, and for the first time in a century, the estate breathed freely, alive, whole, home.
The estate had never felt so alive. Sunlight poured through the windows, warming the stone floors and casting golden patterns across the walls. The air was no longer heavy with memory. It was light, fresh, filled with possibility. Lena and Elias moved through the house like they belonged, not as ghosts or strangers, but as partners, as soulmates. They began to rebuild, not the estate, it was already whole, but their lives, their rhythm, their future. Elias, now flesh and blood, explored the modern world with wide-eyed wonder. Lena introduced him to music, to books, to the strange joy of coffee brewed in a machine that hummed like a tiny dragon. He laughed often. It was a sound Lena had only heard in dreams, and now it echoed through the halls like sunlight. He marveled at the smallest things, a refrigerator, a phone, the way city lights blinked in the distance. But he also taught her about the forest, about the land, about the sacred bond between nature and soul. They walked the grove together. Elias showed her the hidden paths, the places where the veil had once thinned. Lena listened, learning the language of the trees, the rhythm of the wind. She felt her soul stretch, not in pain, but in growth. She was no longer just Lena. She was Elara reborn, and she was home. They planted a garden, wild herbs, flowers, vegetables. Elias's hands moved with reverence, and Lena followed his lead. The soil welcomed them. The seeds sprouted quickly, as if the land itself was grateful. The garden became their sanctuary, a place of laughter, of quiet, of renewal. They danced. One night, beneath the stars, Elias took her hand and led her to the grove. No music played, but they didn't need it. The wind sang for them. The trees swayed. The moon watched. They moved slowly, wrapped in memory and promise, their bodies finally able to touch, to hold, to love. And they dreamed, not of the past, but of the future. Of children, perhaps, of stories told by firelight, of a world where love didn't have to defy death to be real. Lena wrote again, poems, letters, fragments of thought. Elias read them aloud, his voice steady, his heart open. The estate changed with them. Rooms once sealed opened easily. The air grew warmer. The wolf statue in the garden, once a symbol of mourning, now stood proud, a guardian, a monument, a reminder. The villagers, once wary, began to visit. They brought gifts, stories, blessings. The fear had faded. The legend had become truth. And Lena and Elias lived. Not in hiding, not in shadow, but in light, together, whole, alive.
The estate had always been a place of memory, its walls steeped in sorrow, its halls echoing with whispers of the past. But now it had changed. The air was lighter, the shadows no longer lingered. The house, once a monument to loss, had become a sanctuary. It began with the grove. The trees, once bowed with grief, now stood tall and vibrant. Flowers bloomed where none had before. The soil, enriched by the ritual, pulsed with quiet magic. Lena and Elias tended it together, planting herbs and wildflowers, creating paths lined with stones etched with protective runes. Spirits came, not the restless kind, not the ones drawn by pain. These were gentle, lost souls seeking peace. They arrived quietly, drifting through the veil, drawn by the warmth of the land and the love that now lived there. Lena felt them first, soft presences in the corners of rooms, flickers of light in the garden. Elias guided them. He spoke to them in the language of the forest, in the rhythm of the soul. He helped them remember, helped them release. Lena watched as one by one they found rest. The estate became a passage, not a prison, but a place where the dead could find closure. The villagers noticed. The fog lifted, the whispers faded. Children laughed again. People returned to the woods, no longer afraid. They came to the estate with offerings, candles, flowers, stories. They asked for blessings, for guidance, for healing. Lena and Elias welcomed them all. They built a sanctuary. Not a church, not a temple, just a space, a room in the west wing, filled with light and warmth. Anyone could enter. Anyone could speak. The walls held no judgment, only memory, only peace. Lena wrote again. She chronicled the transformation, the ritual, the rebirth, the healing. Her words became a book, passed from hand to hand, read by firelight, whispered in the grove. Elias added his own stories, of battles fought, of love endured, of the sacred bond between soul and soil. Together they taught, not just about magic, but about balance, about grief, about love that survives. They held gatherings in the garden, under the stars. People came from far and wide, drawn by the legend, by the truth, by the sanctuary that had grown from sorrow. And the estate thrived. The walls no longer groaned. The windows gleamed. The wolf statue stood proud, no longer a sentinel of mourning, but a symbol of protection, of legacy, of enduring love. Lena and Elias stood beneath it one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and crimson. "We've made something beautiful," she said. Elias nodded. "We've made something eternal."
The morning was quiet. Not the eerie silence that once haunted the estate, but a peaceful hush, the kind that follows healing, the kind that holds promise. Lena and Elias stood on the balcony of the West Wing, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun rise over the land they had reclaimed. The forest shimmered in the golden light. The grove pulsed gently, its trees swaying like they were breathing. The garden below bloomed with wildflowers, their colors vibrant and defiant. The estate, once a place of sorrow, now stood proud, a sanctuary, a home, a legend reborn. Lena held Elias's hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. His skin was warm, his heartbeat steady. He was no longer a ghost, no longer a memory. He was here, alive, whole. They didn't speak at first. Words felt too small for the moment. Instead, they stood in silence, letting the light wash over them,
letting the wind carry their thoughts. Lena leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. Below, the villagers began to stir. Children ran through the fields, laughter echoing through the trees. Elders walked the paths to the grove, leaving offerings of flowers and candles. The fear was gone. The legend had changed. Elias was no longer the ghost wolf. He was the guardian, the protector, the man who returned for love. Lena smiled. She thought of the journey, the inheritance, the whispers, the dreams, the sacrifice. She thought of Ilara, of the woman she once was and the woman she had become. She thought of the ritual, of the grove, of the moment Elias chose her over eternity. And she knew this was the ending they had earned. But it was also a beginning. They would live here, together. They would teach, they would heal, they would protect. The estate would remain a sanctuary, not just for spirits, but for anyone seeking peace. The wolf statue in the garden, once a symbol of mourning, now stood as a monument to love that defied time. Elias turned to her, his eyes soft. "Do you think they'll remember?" Lena nodded. "They already do, but now they'll remember the truth." He smiled, and together they watched the sun climb higher, casting light across the land. The shadows retreated, the fog was gone, the veil was sealed, and the world, once fractured, now felt whole. Lena took a deep breath, the scent of pine and wildflowers filling her lungs. "We're home," she said. Elias kissed her forehead. "We always were." And as the day began, they stood hand in hand, guardians of a story that had found its ending and its beginning in love. The land was quiet. The house was warm, and the wolf watched over them still.